Great question, and thank you very much. This is the key question that a lot of people struggle with. And it's, we consult a lot of companies in a way that might seem a little bit surprising. It's really about starting extremely small and starting with people who are passionate about one of these things. So find one business leader who believes in things that we talk about, who starts to be passionate about it. And then start with something small and build a great success story around it. And then have this guy influence his peers, right? So when we talk about change management, I think we think way too big. We think the whole company at once. And we think we got to influence all these people. Guess what? You're never going to. The critics forget. You're never going to manage to sway them anyways. Forget it. The indifference, this takes a lot of courage to do anything, right? Because you've got all these pressure, yet you're acting on something where you have no immediate pressure. All the indifference in the middle will not be courageous enough to do anything. So you've got to find that one or two business sponsors who are absolutely passionate about this, and you start doing something with them. We actually call it the virus approach, right? So we basically say, we're going to infect your company with the virus. And it's going to be contagious because people will just see the effect. It's not about talking about it, it's about creating impact and doing things differently that people see happening. From my experience, it's the only way. You can talk all you want, you can create the greatest PowerPoints, everything you want, it doesn't work. It's about small changes with very few people that will then spread, and make sure you create success stories. That's the approach we always work with companies, and sometimes it's not very popular because companies want to change large scale at once, and we're like, this is probably going to take a couple of years, right? But that's just realistic. That's change that sticks. Other questions?
Thank you for your presentation. I agree most of the points that you mentioned. And there's one thing that struck my mind. Actually, you mentioned about the bargaining power of the employee. They have more bargaining power than the employer, but will that actually has an impact on the growth of the SME? Because if employee, they want more flexibility, they're more demanding, actually the employer may not be naturally fulfilling all their needs or all their demands. That means if people want that, then that will trigger the growth of SME. Do you agree that prediction? And there's another thing I want to explore more is about, hey, if we are talking about digital, economy, but people many times forget about the ability to communicate in a high quality way. I think that's another trend for the future.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Again, I think two great points. And the first point about SMEs and the challenge to SMEs when employees, have more demands, different demands. If you look at employees or applicants as a base, I think they're not as homogeneous probably as we now assume. There's subgroups, right? And if we look at these different human needs, different needs are differently important to different people. So if you look at SMEs, they have some natural strengths with regard to these motives where they can offer things, right? They can offer much more, for example, impact on business decisions. They can offer employees that you're part of shaping the company. Our guys are part of the future, right? We have discussions. I'm going to say the rest of the week, we're going to have a lot of discussions about where do we take the business next and what are our strategic goals, what do we want to achieve. You can't have that in the large companies. The impact that you have on how the business develops is very minimal. So people who are driven by some of these needs or by some of these needs, where in a small company you can do a lot of things, right? You can do a lot of different roles and you can change roles. And it's very quick, you do something well, you have the job tomorrow, basically, right? All you need is to convince one person. So you have a lot of advantages here, and you can implement things very quickly. You want flexible work schedules, all you need to convince is one person, the boss, typically, and that it works, right? So I think not being too defensive about SMEs, there's a lot of people that love to work for SMEs if they play to their advantages, right? Now, if you're a rigid, inflexible, old school run SME, then you have a problem, right? Because then you can't offer the esteem and the prestige of the brand. You can't offer that, right? And you cannot offer the compensation levels that large multinationals can offer. Now, if you then offer nothing of the other things, then you're in trouble. So you have to offer something else. It's about what is your value proposition. But we found that at least in other areas of the world where I have more expertise personally, for example in Europe and in the US, there's a lot of companies that are more mid-sized, like 500 to 1,000 employees, and that are, for example, located in very unattractive areas, like countryside somewhere. Okay, for a Hong Konger, this might sound strange. You love forests. I know when Grace and Thomas, our two colleagues, were in Germany the first time, we were riding on a train and they were looking out the window and they were staring. I'm like, what are you staring at? Well, the trees. You know, there's so many trees. Like, okay, so, but you know, when you're living in a countryside in the middle of nowhere, it's not a very attractive place to be. So there's a lot of companies now in these areas who do a lot of things already in this direction because there's a pressure on them. The most arrogant companies are typically the companies that are in the greatest places, have the greatest brands, and think that they're the greatest thing in the world and employees should just come to them, right? So I think actually the small and medium companies a lot of times do a lot of these things right because they have more pressure to change. So first question. Second question, could you repeat? I want to make sure.
The second question is about, I think there's another need for the workforce, is the ability to communicate in a high quality way.
Yeah.
Because you can be fast, but if you don't know how to communicate, it doesn't matter.
It's definitely key, and it's a key to a lot of the work that we do, because the demands on communication are much higher than they were in the past. So you're communicating across 5 generations, you're communicating with employees who are more demanding, right? And you have matrix structures popping up everywhere, you have international organizations popping up, so you're communicating across functions and you're communicating across cultures. Now that's huge. That's a lot of different challenges at once. So communication is absolutely key, and it's one of these things that you're almost working on constantly, you're never done. Like some companies, you know, think that this is one of the things, you have it in a training program, you tick the box, you're done. But that's the ongoing feedback piece is absolutely key. And I can't even tell you how often I screw up, right? Doing international work, you know, every once in a while, you just say something and people are like, you know, you really offended people. And I'm like, yeah, I'm sorry. You know, it's part of trying to work internationally. So you're never gonna, I don't think you're ever gonna be done. It's about being very reflective, about being very humble, and being very honest, and being open to that feedback that will constantly come. And we need managers who act that way, you know, who don't think that just because I'm great at influencing this particular group of people, I can influence anyone. It's not as simple. So it's a very good point. Other questions?
As we saw earlier, a lot of the KPIs for a lot of the senior leaders are very money driven. As you're going out and trying to get these pockets of change and get these leaders, is there a lot of pressure to show some kind of ROI or some kind of return on the work that's being done to try and roll this culture change into organizations?
Sometimes we experience that pressure, but you know, I mean, there's really 2 pieces to that. I mean, the first one is you can show ROI in terms of more of a causal chain. Like, you know, for example, we're just now this week discussing a program that is around critical thinking with the customer. And you know, it's in a very harmony-driven culture where people are used to just say yes to the boss, right? Some Asian countries, that's still kind of the norm. The boss says something, we agree, we just do it, we just execute. So they have a new manager that tries to change the culture and tries to create a culture where people criticize everything. You know, start thinking, start challenging assumptions, start challenging their boss. That's a huge piece, right? And we had this discussion, how do we measure ROI? So we created a very simple model that said, you know, kind of, you know, the first level is behavioral change, right? This is behavior. So we can simply see, and you know, very simple would be, we just have simple observation forms where a manager sits in discussions and rates behaviors. How often did people say no? How often did people ask a why question? You know, things like that. Simple behaviors that we will define together with them. This is the behavioral change. So that's the first level KPI. Now what that should lead to on the second level is some more immediate effects in terms of, for example, how many new ideas are generated? How many processes are improved as a result of these behaviors? You know, things like that. These are immediate outcomes, but there's still other factors that influence them. So this is not the only factor, but it has some impact. So these are things like, you know, number of ideas, number of process improvements, you know. and so forth. And now long term, we might have an impact on revenues, profits, efficiencies, things like that, right? But the piece is, we're saying, and we're being very honest with people, I have no freaking idea what percentage of impact we'll have on that. I don't know. I don't have any research. I don't know. Managers challenge us and say, well, how much can we expect? I don't freaking know. Sorry, right? But I can tell you, we can work on what specific behavioral changes we want. We can look at this, and we can look at what relationship do we have, and then our informed assumption is that we will have an impact here, but we cannot quantify. Now, I think we need to get managers past a mathematical mindset, okay? I think it is about, there are some things where you have to make some assumptions based on a lot of facts, based on a lot of data. But you also have to make a decision under uncertainty, which is a key managerial competence. If you need to run a number for everything, you're probably not a good manager, because it is ultimately about making decisions under uncertainty. And this is one of the examples, right? So I know it's not a 100% answer, right? It's a way to get there. Other questions?
You talk about line managers becoming coaches, which is quite important and quite significant. But how are you going to offer them the incentive, or even give them the right skills? Sometimes the line managers, they are very good at their specific jobs, but become a management role or even coaching role becomes a headache to them, or maybe it's completely a new skill set for them. So how are you going to drive that?
Now, and it's a good question, because you had the two parts. One is more about the incentives, and one is about the skills and behaviors. Now, with regards to the incentives, I'm going to give a very provocative answer. We're not going to give them any incentives, because this behavior has to be intrinsically motivated. If you coach because you have to, or because there's a reward for it, forget it. You're not going to be a coach. If you want to be an effective coach, you can only be an effective coach if you absolutely care about the person in front of you, if you're really interested in them, in their development, if you're truly empathetic. None of that can be bought with money, with bonuses, or with threats. Forget it. It doesn't work, right? So it's almost like we have to explain to people, and we work a lot on the why. What is the difference? We work on very fundamental things. We have one program, for example, that we're running in the company, which is about what is your role as a leader. And we talk about things like, when you leave this earth, what do you want to leave behind? A pile of money for you? You can't eat it, right? You can put it into your coffin. You can be buried with it. Is that what you want to leave this earth with? Or what else? What is the impact you want to create? And who? Who are you interacting with? What are you creating for their lives, for their families? What environment do you create? So when you start asking these questions, a lot of people start to think, right? They start to step out of what is my job today, and really, long term, why am I living? What's my purpose, right? At the end of the day, why am I on this earth? So that's a very fundamental question. So you start asking these questions, and we're not forcing anybody to do anything. We're just getting people engaged in dialogue. And then we start asking questions like, we explain this, and we have a session where we do a lot of work on having people understand what this means. And then we talk about, now think about the last 4 weeks, and think about everything that you've done. And through your behavior, how did you positively or negatively impact your employees being able to live these motives at work, right? So when you requested that lady that had a small kid to come in on Saturday, what did you do, right? What was the impact of that behavior? So we hold people accountable to look at their behavior, and to look at the impact of their behavior, and to think about alternative behaviors that might create more impact. Because one of the concepts that we also use a lot in coaching is the difference between intention and impact, right? People a lot of times have very noble intentions, but the impact is very different. So they think they care about people, and they think they're a people leader, but if you talk to the people, the story becomes very different. It's not that they don't have noble intentions, they just don't realize that their actions are not aligned with their intentions. So, it's more of a coaching issue, but ultimately, I'm not going to force anybody to be a coach. I can't. If you don't care ultimately about people, I tell people when I give feedback, you should get out of leadership. I would never want to work for you, personally. I hope you're never going to be my manager. That's all I can do, right? But I'm not going to change that person. Now, on the skill part, I think it is a lot about reducing the complexity, making it simple, and taking the fear factor away. So if you look at coaching literature, there's tons of books. They're all extremely complicated. They're all confusing. And where do you start, right? There's all these different models and schools, and some have no theory, others have some theory. It's very complicated. So we try to reduce it. For example, for this program that you saw, we just looked at 7 different behaviors that are key, and we looked at 3 coaching contexts: day-to-day coaching, coaching for performance, career coaching. That's the 3 contexts that you would encounter as a manager, right? And so it's very simple, and it's behaviors like active listening, asking open questions, asking reflective questions, challenging and confronting, working with emotions, very simple stuff. And then we just practice more, and feedback. It's, you know, simplifying it to a level where you can implement. So those are the 2 answers. But I think you're spot on. The first answer is more important. If you want to be a coach, you will learn the skills. You will read the books. You're not going to need a training. You're gonna just get the knowledge that you need. If you don't want to be a coach, all the training in the world is not going to help. So, you know, I'm saying that doing a lot of this training, and that's why you need to focus so much on the why.